Hello, everyone. I'm Donna Fiducia.
And I'm Don NEUEN, and this is Cowboy Logic Radio.
Cowboys didn't dance, didn't wear designer shirts. When their hearts were filled with memories, their bodies filled with hurt. They would sit around the campfire and exchange a piercing glance. Back when the West was really wild, cowboys didn't dance.
Welcome to Cowboy Logic Radio, everyone. I'm Donna Fiducia, and Don NEUEN is just sitting there with his arms crossed. Normally he goes, and I'm Don NEUEN at this time, but he's not doing that. Why is that, honey? Are you just annoyed? Why are your arms crossed?
I just thought I'd be different tonight. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Annoyed at Stacey Abrams.
Yeah, I am annoyed at Stacey Abrams, but good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Don NEUEN, and Stacey Abrams is not.
She is a mental midget, though.
Stacey Abrams will never welcome you to tonight's episode of Cowboy Logic Radio. She will never tell you that we have an absolute riveting episode, and she will never say, boy, have we got a big one for you. Back to you, Don. And she'll never say, back to you, Donna.
Well, for those of you not in Georgia, Stacey Abrams is the Democrat candidate for governor here in Georgia. Now, in 1992, according to the Drudge Report, Stacey Abrams was in a protest burning the state flag of Georgia.
That sounds like someone that we need as our governor.
Yeah. Also, Stacey Abrams basically said, we don't need agriculture jobs here in Georgia. We'll find something else for you to do.
That sounds like someone we need as our governor.
Earth to Stacey Abrams. 7 out of 10 jobs in Georgia are ag-based.
Including our next-door neighbor.
Earth to Stacey Abrams. We are called the Peach State for a reason.
And there's peanuts that are grown here and a whole heck of a lot of cattle. And chickens.
Does Jimmy
and
Carter...
poultries.
Does Jimmy Carter...
See, that's more than one poultry.
And poultries. I thought that was a... wasn't that a fort? Oh, that's Moultrie. Poultries?
Poultries. Okay. Like our next-door neighbor. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we do need to give a shout-out to our next-door neighbor, by gosh, David Huddleston. For those of you that live in the West Georgia area, everybody knows David Huddleston. And David Huddleston has poultries.
He has chicken houses, which on occasion don't smell real good, but damn, they make a lot of money.
The thing is, there's a couple of things that you people need to understand about chicken houses. First of all, the smell that exudes from them smells like money.
Yes, that's true. That's
now, the other thing that you need to know about David Huddleston's chicken houses is that they don't smell very often. The only time they really smell is when he spreads chicken litter all over our pastures.
Which is free fertilizer for our horses.
That's right. So and the job of chicken litter is to smell exactly like chicken litter.
This is true. On occasion, a feather might fly by now and then, but for the most part...
that adds to the flavor of things.
Our horses eat chicken poop.
Hey, I don't know about you other people that live in God's country and that live out in the country or rural America. I'm seeing a whole lot of deer running around right now.
I'm seeing a whole lot of Brian Kemp signs, too, because I think Stacey Abrams is out of touch. Now, unfortunately, in the city of Atlanta, where many people will vote Democrat,
the 1996 Summer Olympics are awarded to the city of Atlanta. You remember that guy that said that?
Yeah, really.
The city of Atlanta.
How does Stacey Abrams want to lead this state when she says we don't need agriculture jobs? What does she want to do? Where does she think food comes from? She obviously eats a lot of it.
Oh, so zinger. Donna lands a zinger on Abrams.
I don't care anymore. This is stupidity. If you vote for this woman, if you vote for any Democrat, At this point, they are
You are
so
muy
far
loco
to
la
the
cabeza.
left. Well, they're just so far to the left. This is not the Democrat Party of JFK that I grew up in. My parents were Democrats through and through. Union Democrats, JFK Democrats. JFK would be a conservative Republican by today's standards. Wake up, millennials. This is your future that we, quite frankly, are screwing up for you. So you
Hey, whoa. I'm not.
Well,
You're not.
DC is
Well,
$20
that's
trillion
not us.
in debt, $21 trillion now. That is not good.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get serious again like I've been doing every week for probably the past 2 years now. And I'm going to let you know that in 2 weeks, the most important midterm of my lifetime, which means your lifetime, is taking place. Now, if you've debated whether or not you want to go out and vote, and if you're undecided on whether you want to be an independent or vote for some libertarian that's on the ticket, or, you're not sure what you want to do, I'm here to tell you that if we lose the House of Representatives, the next 2 years are going to be absolutely miserable if you're a God-loving American patriot.
It's not even that. It's common sense.
No. It is that serious.
I know it's serious, but here's the thing. Capitalism works. If capitalism doesn't work, why do you think we'd have now 14,000 people coming up through Guatemala and Honduras, through Mexico, trying to get to the United States? If this country is so bad, Democrats and mainstream media, why is everybody dying to come here? There's a reason for it. Capitalism works. The free market economy works. If you're black, Hispanic, a woman, we have record low unemployment in history. What does that? We have 4.2% GDP. Obama couldn't do 2% sustained for a year, I think, for an entire 8 years of his presidency. Remember, Obama said, well, those jobs are gone and they're not coming back. How are they going to come back? Trump did it in 2 years, but the mainstream media won't give the guy any credit. This is unbelievable.
Well, the mainstream media will never give him credit.
No, because
the only
they are an appendage of the Democrat Party.
The only people that are on Trump's team are the American voters.
Yeah. And did you see yesterday in Texas? Oh, my God. Unbelievable. You wanted to continue with that thought? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was actually talking about how damn serious this election is in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't go out and vote, and if you don't vote red, we're screwed. It's that simple. Donna can come up with all of her list of reasons why. We don't need reasons why. You need to vote, and you need to vote Republican. End of story. And that's nationwide. And here's the thing. I had one of our listeners hit me on Facebook the other day and say, I've got this guy that I'm trying to vote for, and he's a Republican, but, I think he's a Democrat plant, and this and that and this and that. Bottom line is, you vote Republican. We can afford to have an occasional crappy politician that we elect. We can get rid of them. But the bottom line is, we got to keep the House. And there's only one way we're going to do that, and that is to outvote the Democrats. Because the Democrats have become unrecognizable. I don't know about you people that are listening to this radio show, but I can't personally identify with a liberal or a Democrat or a progressive at all. I have nothing in common with these weirdos.
They're not liberal anymore. That would be at least something where you could have a conversation about. The Democrat Party has been taken over by socialists and communists, period. You've got all these people, Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris, saying we're going to give you a living wage of, whatever it is. In fact, I think Cory Booker said something like $50,000 to every family. I mean, Where's that going to
come from?
What a mental midget to even think of that. Cory Booker, who basically did what they said Brett Kavanaugh did, he admitted it in writing, but nobody looks at that. That's another story. Let's look at what our friend Frank Franchese sent me, okay? Frank always sends me some great stuff. He's
Sounds like
listener.
a nice Irish boy.
Frank Franchese, okay?
Is he an Irish boy,
Yeah,
Donna?
he is. Nice Irish boy via Italy.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a collection of cowisms, for lack of a better term. Socialism is you have 2 cows, you give one to your neighbor. Communism is you have 2 cows, the state takes both and gives you some milk. Fascism is you have 2 cows, the state takes both and sells you some milk. Bureaucratism is you have 2 cows, the state takes both, shoots one, milks the other, and then throws the milk away. That's bureaucrats. That makes sense. That would be DC.
Mm-hmm.
Traditional capitalism, take note. You have 2 cows, you sell one, and you buy a bull because you have foresight. Your herd multiplies and the economy grows. You sell them and retire on the income. Imagine that. Capitalism.
Hey, that's awesome, Frank. Thanks for sending that in to us. Donna, I want you to read it again this time, and I'm going to play the role of Silk in Diamond and Silk. I want you to read that, and you be Diamond.
We did have them on last week. They were a hoot, weren't they?
And I'm going to be Silk, okay? Here we go.
Okay, this is cowisms, for lack of a better term.
Mm-hmm.
Socialism, you have 2 cows, you give one to your neighbor.
Oh, yeah.
Communism, you have 2 cows,
Yeah.
the state takes both and gives you some milk.
Mm-hmm.
Fascism, you have 2 cows,
Right.
the state takes both
Okay.
and sells you some milk.
Whoa, sells.
Bureaucratism,
Yeah.
you have 2 cows, the state takes both,
That's right.
shoots one, milks the other, and
That's
then
right.
throws the milk away.
Throws it away.
And traditional capitalism.
Traditional.
You have 2 cows, you sell one and
Right.
buy a bull,
Bull.
your herd multiplies, the economy grows
Whoa, grows.
at 4.2% GDP, by the way, and you sell them and retire on the income.
That's right. How was that? Was that pretty good?
That was. They were a hoot, weren't they?
They were a
Diamond
hoot,
Silk.
and God bless them and thank them for what they're doing.
There's more to this little litany here. How about this? A French corporation.
That's right.
You have 2 cows, you go on strike, organize a riot, block the roads because you want 3 cows.
Ooh, yeah.
An Italian corporation. You have 2 cows, but you don't know where they are. You decide to have lunch. See, my people, they just relax. Have a glass of wine.
I've never known Italians to relax.
When they're not shooting people.
or going into what is it, mass? When they go into mass, the guys, the mob, they kill people all week long. Then they go into mass and they ask for forgiveness, and then they go back out. Yeah,
they all run out after they get their little wafer. They run out so they can get out of the parking lot in time. When I was a kid. In Episcopal church, actually, because my mother thought the Catholic Church was too strict.
Oh, yeah.
They actually gave you a little bit of wine. I got a little sip of wine. Wasn't that big a deal?
Not me.
Nowadays, you get arrested, you did that.
Yeah.
How about this? An Iraqi corporation. Everyone thinks you have lots of cows. You tell them that you have none. Nobody believes you, so they bomb the crap out of you and invade your country.
How long is this list he's come up with?
You still have no cows, but at least you now have a democracy.
Lovely.
Someone tell Barack Obama we don't have a democracy.
Oh, wait a minute. Hey, listen.
Republic?
Barack Obama gave a speech the other day.
He did?
Okay. Let me. I'm going to read from it. Okay.
I can still get to the New Zealand and the Greek corporation.
I'm going to read. I'm going to read to you people's Barack Obama's speech. You ready? Hold on. Let me get it out.
I don't know if I want to hear this.
Me, I, me, mine, I, me, me, I, me, 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 I, me, I, me. What are you singing while I'm trying to read this?
I, me, mine. That would be George Harrison. May he rest in peace.
Let me finish.
A song called I, Me, Mine.
Let me finish, please.
Okay.
Me, I, me, I, my, my, me.
Well, don't you think that was apropos? The song was called I, Me, Mine.
I don't remember all those old George Harrison.
Wasn't that long ago? And
really
God,
weird sitar sounding.
I actually got to interview him and his wife, Olivia, many years ago. That's another story.
Olivia, what's her name? She was in Gone with the Wind.
No, that's de Havilland. She's still alive. She's
I know. She's
2
like
years old. I interviewed her, too.
Yeah, very impressive.
You know what I said to her? What was Clark Gable like? And you know what she said? I wish I knew.
Oh, you know she knows.
She was about 85 then, and she still looked damn good.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Don NEUEN, and I would like it if you would never forget that. Hey, where were we? We were at the dump.
We were talking about Stacey Abrams.
Hold on. We were at the dump this past weekend in Carroll County.
We're such rednecks.
You got to remember that we live out in the country, so there is no trash collection.
Do you think Stacey Abrams goes to the dump?
No.
Do you think Al Gore
I think she
recycles?
might take a dump, but I don't think she goes there. Now, so Donna and I were at the dump because we have to take all of our trash.
We have to take a dump.
We got to take it to the dump.
To the dump, yes. Okay.
And so we were at the dump, and we were discarding things that we don't want anymore,
lot of
trash.
Crap.
And when we pulled up, there was a guy in a pickup truck. And on the back of it, it said, that he was a deplorable NRA sticker,
Marine.
Trump. Yeah. And, good red-blooded American. So I walked up to him after I had discarded some of the trash. You had to do most of it.
I was doing all the work because you were BSing with this guy. I'm like, who the hell is this person?
Yeah.
But he was a very
he's
nice
like
guy.
In his 80s. Mm-hmm. And I walked up to him and I said, hey, I just want to introduce myself. I'm another deplorable. Nice to meet you. And so we started talking, and this guy was on top of what was going on. He had insight. I mean, when we're growing up, and I'm 57 years old, but if I've got somebody that's 80 years old, I'm going to shut up and I'm going to listen to him. And he was just speaking the gospel.
Because they've lived through history.
So at any rate, here's what's so cool about it. I introduced myself, and then Donna comes up after she did all the work for me. And she comes up and we start
the whole truck.
Yeah, so we were talking to him, and we said, hey, check out this radio show, Cowboy Logic Radio on WLBB. Well, I listen to that all the time.
How cool was that?
Initials HR. That's all I can remember. In that beautiful Chevy truck. I think he was in a Chevy.
Red Chevy. Red truck.
We hope you're listening, and thank you. And it means a whole lot when we're traveling around Carrollton, going to the dump, doing things like that, going to Tractor Supply, going over to Home Depot, eating at Burger King, eating at Jefferson's. Mm-hmm. Where else do we eat? Where are some other places we can plug?
Olive Garden's the only
Olive Garden.
Milano's.
But don't go there on the weekends. You got to go there on the week during the week.
Because they
Milano's Pizza down in LaGrange. Man, did we shove a lot of food in our face this weekend?
Yes, we have. It's not good.
Man.
Well,
it is good.
Exercise.
It's
good,
good.
But we need to exercise.
Very good. Very good, Donna.
So let me ask you this. We're going to have Claire Lopez on for the entire last hour of the show. She is a former CIA. She is just a total authority on the Middle East. And the reason why...
Among many other things.
Among other things. And EMPs and everything else. Russia. But the thing is, we have to work around because she's got 8 million degrees, but she also takes Farsi lessons on Saturdays. So when we call her, we have to kind of work around that. Anyhow, she has the latest on this guy, Khashoggi is how you pronounce it. Khashoggi, that was killed in Saudi Arabia. Okay, I mean in the Saudi consulate in Turkey. Okay. My question is, and Claire will give us her take on that. My question is, because the mainstream media is so up in arms about this, where was the mainstream media when our U.S. ambassador and 3 heroes were left hung out to dry in Benghazi?
They were backing Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama.
And a video.
That's where they were.
And a video they said caused that.
And they were buying into Susan Rice's line of crap.
Liar, liar, pants on fire. Your head is hotter than a telephone
don't get
wire.
me started on Benghazi.
So everything's bigger in Texas. The Dems want, this was Trump in Texas yesterday. He had thousands of people there. I mean, it was packed.
How does this socialist schmuck pronounce his first name? Beto?
Vito.
No, Beto. It's B-E-T-O.
Beto? He's Irish. Come on. He's
I know.
Not, what does he say? He's Mexican?
He
Beto O'Rourke.
skateboarded onto a stage for a
Beto
speech.
O'Rourke. And he said, well, yeah, I guess I am going to try to impeach Trump. What the heck does this guy have to offer? What the heck does the Democrat Party have to offer? And that is exactly what Trump said yesterday. The Dems want open borders, repeal the tax cut. Remember, even though it's $2,000, it's crumbs. They're against the military. They're not good for your vets. How do you win with that? That's exactly what Trump said. And I got to tell you,
they
this
have
is
nothing.
Unbelievable.
They have nothing.
Even out in Minnesota.
Oh, yeah, you
Minnesota.
betcha. Oh, yeah, tell me about Sota.
That would be Michigan, too. And
oh, yeah, you
Wisconsin.
betcha.
The thing is, this is actually
Hey, shut that window and bring me a cold dairy product and some cheese, please.
It's getting to the point where we might have some tight races there because Keith Ellison, who beats his wife and his girlfriend, finally is losing some steam because I think even Democrats are saying, hey, this hashtag Me Too movement should go for the Democrats as well as the Republicans.
Hey, Minnesota, let me ask you a question there.
What's wrong with you, Minnesota?
No,
Wake up.
hey, here's what you got to think about up there in Minnesota.
Dairy
you need
products?
to think about whether you want an attorney general whose allegiance is to Sharia law over the Constitution of Minnesota.
That should not be allowed.
That's
period.
what you need to think about there, Minnesota.
That should not be allowed, period. You know, let's talk about the cold Northwest.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about it.
Middle of America.
I'm back being silk.
Your father has to go and get a back operation.
Mm-hmm.
And we might have to go to Green Bay.
No, we don't go to
see
Green
him.
Bay. We don't. Oshkosh, my
It's
gosh.
pretty damn close. It's snowing already up there.
I know.
The last place I want to go in November is Wisconsin.
It's a little chilly up there.
Unless we go to the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field.
Well, you want to see that.
Yeah. I'd rather see the Red Sox beat the Dodgers. Go
Hey,
baby.
yeah. All you Dodgers fans out there.
You know, they used to call me when I hate to say it, when I worked in radio in New York, they called me Dodger Fiducia because I loved Steve Garvey. Until he cheated on his wife and didn't
Now
run
you
for
didn't.
governor.
Then you didn't love him anymore.
Yeah, but
Hey, Donna.
got to meet
Hey,
him.
Donna. We
That
got to
was
go
on
to
my
break.
bucket
Why don't
list.
you tell all our beloved listeners who we got coming up tonight? Back to you, Donna.
We're going to be discussing voting rights and voting rights for felons who did their sentence, they did their time, and we'll be talking to a guy named Neil Volz, who's going to be talking about allowing convicted felons to vote. And then the last hour of the show, the entire hour, because it takes almost a half hour just to give a resume, we'll be talking to Claire Lopez, Middle East expert. It's all coming up next on Cowboy Logic Radio.
Check us out on the web at cowboylogic.us.
Welcome back to Cowboy Logic Radio. I'm Donna Fiducia along with Don Neuen. And Neil Volz joins us this half hour making his Cowboy Logic debut. He's working with the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. That's FloridaRRC.org. And Neil has more than 25 years of experience working as a public servant. He's worked with homeless veterans and homeless services. He's the president of the board of directors for Be the Light. an anti-human trafficking organization. And he also serves on the board for the Freedom and Virtue Institute, Habitat for Humanity of a number of counties in Florida. And he's a former guest lecturer at the US Naval Academy. And he was named a top hired gun in the Hill newspaper's annual list of top lobbyists in Washington, D.C. But Neil, tell us a little bit about a ballot initiative you're working on right now, actually in Florida, that seeks to allow nonviolent felons to vote once they serve their sentence.
Yeah, so what we have done, we've helped get an amendment on the ballot in Florida, Amendment 4. And the history of this is really cool because this is a ballot initiative that came about from the people. It came about from folks from all over the state, all backgrounds, all walks of life, who were dealing with a system in Florida that just doesn't work as well as it could, right? We're one of 4 states that permanently bars people who have former felony convictions from re-entering their community and being full citizens and having the right to vote. And so what we're trying to do ultimately is this kind of common sense step forward. Take the kind of step that Texas has already done and Georgia has already done, and that is to basically adhere to this common sense value of when a debt's paid, it's paid, right? Like just real simple stuff that people can grasp. And we've spent years going across the state, getting petitions signed, and ultimately over 1 million people signed these petitions and put it on the ballot. And in the next couple of weeks, with early voting and then the election day, the public is going to get a final say in terms of whether we are going to join the 46 other states and decide that, you know what, when you're done with whatever sentence the judge gave you, we want to give you the opportunity to rejoin the community and allow the communities to prosper because we're not creating incentives for people to fail as opposed to succeed.
Now, Neil, this organization that you're with, Donna, I don't have
the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition.
Yeah, first of all, Neil, share with the listeners how they can find out about the work that you guys are doing. I don't have any of the notes in front of me, and Donna does.
Yes, you go to our website, FloridaRRC.org. So Florida RRC, which is Rights Restoration Coalition.org. You can see a little bit about our organization and who we are. And at the end of the day, our organization is a membership organization, and it's made up of folks who are returning citizens. That's the language that we use for people who are formerly convicted but have paid back all portions of their debt to society. So somebody like me, I got a felony conviction in 2006. And I got it the old-fashioned way, to be honest with you. I earned it by being greedy and stupid and selfish, and I crossed these lines that I shouldn't have crossed. And dealing with the consequences of that helped change my life. I went from having I was successful professionally, and then I made these stupid decisions. I got caught, and then, boom, I lived with the consequences of those decisions. I lost my job. I lost my house, ended up getting divorced, and I ended up moving down to Florida and went from, kind of financially being in a good place to really struggling to find work. I worked as a night janitor for 2 years at minimum wage as I was, had to check that box and stay out of felony conviction. And that humbling process was really good for me. I ultimately got engaged in working with people who are homeless and seeing folks get back on their feet really inspired me. I ended up volunteering at a place. They offered me a part-time job, and then I became the director of the program. And now in Lee County, down near Naples and Fort Myers and Cape Coral, great part of the state, I'm the chairman of our local homeless coalition. And I'm somebody who, helps manage millions of dollars that goes to local churches and local organizations that are helping people battle opioid addiction and helping people get back on their feet. And so at a certain moment, it begins to hit me that I'm like, wait a minute, I'm allowed to do this. I pay my taxes, but I'm not really able to have a say in my community in terms of who should be the school board or, what could impact my family. And so I began to realize that I wasn't alone. And a lot of us did that. We realized, wait a minute, Florida actually in this area, and I love Florida, man, but in this area, we haven't made the changes that some other states have. And so we lead the nation. Almost half the people who are disenfranchised from voting for the rest of their life, who have paid back their entire debt to society, live in the state of Florida.
Well,
and so that's where the FRSP came about.
Full disclosure, Neil. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, I met this fine organization because they actually came to me for a bus for a statewide tour that they're currently on. And so that's how I became related to both Neil and Jessica, who was my initial contact with this organization. Now, there's something that I want to point out to everyone, and that is that this organization is made up on a bipartisan level. You've got liberals, you've got conservatives, you've got independents, you've got libertarians, and that's the beauty of this organization, guys, is that, you know, they have all found, different sides of the political aisle have found unity in this one cause. And when Jessica called me up and asked me and started inquiring about a bus for this, what is it, Neil, about an 18, 20-day tour, 15, 18 days tour, you know, it was unlike a lot of the things that we do in the world of rock and roll. I mean, this was a cause, and the thing is, when she first approached me, she didn't really tell me what was going on with it. She just said Fourth Amendment, and you know, so I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe I've got a Hillary Clinton gal here on me.
No, Amendment 4 is the ballot initiative.
I'm sorry, Amendment 4.
Not the Fourth Amendment.
I'm not running. I'm not running with notes here, ladies. I never do. Anyhow, and it shows just like that. At any rate, you know, I said, well, tell me about what you got going on. I want to know. And she goes, well, you may not want to know, but you may want to know. So she laid it out to me. And again, Neil, the beauty of this thing, this is bipartisan. And as a strong conservative, I am 100% behind your program, behind your cause. I totally agree that if an individual commits a crime and is found guilty of that and is convicted of a felony, that once they serve their time, they ought to be able to get back into society, and they ought to make some important decisions that I have the luxury and the privilege of being able to make.
But I think we need, Neil, to emphasize this does not include really serious things like murder, rape, that kind of thing. We're talking about people that just made mistakes like you did. And that is a big difference. Because at first when I heard it, I thought everybody could vote. I'm thinking, oh, I'm not so sure about this, you know. But no, it's a big difference. Can you explain that a little bit?
I can. Okay, Don, thanks, man. I just it's really cool to talk to you guys. And as you know, myself, 25 plus year conservative, I consider myself more a member of the conservative movement than even part of the party, though I'm a Republican as well, you know. And so I like hearing somebody stand up for kind of beliefs is something that's I really treasure and I'm grateful to hear. And I do my best to live that way. And so thanks for saying that.
Yeah.
And to your point about the fact that this is something that doesn't treat everybody the same. This really did come about. Like, and I always go back to it, and I know some people come at it from different perspectives, but I've just been doing this since 2015 and literally been driving all over the state in my car, sitting at coffee shops and churches and talking to people about this. Like, this really does come from, it's a reflection of the will of the public to try and change something and make things a little bit better. And so it does include the carve-outs that you mentioned. It does not treat everybody the same. This doesn't apply to people convicted of murder. It doesn't apply to people who have convicted of violent sexual felonies. And yet we still really hold on to that idea, you know, that when a debt's paid, it's paid. That this simple concept, because we just think, you know, that the simplicity of it is good. That, you know, people can get behind this concept of, hey, my aunt, my uncle, pastor, my friend, I know somebody who wrote a bad check. I know somebody who did this. And the truth is, in Florida, 75% of the people who get felony convictions don't get sent to prison. You know, so these are people who are already in our communities. They're already at school with us. They're already at work with us. They're already, you know, and so this idea of a lifetime, you know, in which they're not able to fully participate in the community just doesn't, you know, strike it as that's kind of where we want to be as a state, you know.
Exactly.
And I think that's why so many of these others, and I look to Texas, for instance, Georgia, you know, I know the leaders in those states, and I watched as they kind of sat through and said, well, hey, what's the best thing for our state? How do we help people get back on their feet and create jobs and, you know, do the right thing? Well, part of it is allowing people to participate in the community.
Neil, let me reintroduce you. We're talking with Neil Volz. Neil is working with the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And you can find it at FloridaRRC.org. That's FloridaRRC.org. And it's an Amendment 4 on the ballot. It's a ballot initiative in Florida. And Neil, as a convicted felon, and I've got to say, you paid your dues, you paid the price. The stigma has to be horrible. And I got to tell you, somebody who really never gave much of a thought to something like this, I find it kind of refreshing that you're saying only one of 4 more states that need this. All the other states do have this already. Felons who have served their time are allowed to vote in almost every state.
Yeah, and so this is a state-based issue. So each of the states can make their own decisions in terms of how there are some states that, allow people to vote in prison, right? So but the vast majority of the states, some of the states that I just mentioned, the Ohios, the Texases, the Georgias, they adhere to this just basic premise when all was said and done, saying, hey, you know what did the judge tell you had to do? When the judge who knows your case the best and individually knows what your situation is, and if you did something bad, you gotta get a tougher sentence, a longer sentence, and if you reoffend with it, you didn't pay your price back, whatever the judge says, then that's what we're going to go off of. And I think that's what these other states.
It kind of makes sense, man. I mean, now let me ask you 2 questions. Number one, where in Amendment 4? Have I got that right, Donna?
Mm-hmm. Yes, honey. It's Amendment 4 on the ballot initiative in Florida.
Yeah. And I agree. This ought to be states' decisions. This should not be a federal decision that's made.
Right.
Where do you draw that line saying, okay, we've got somebody that is a child rapist?
No, that's
no. Where does this amendment draw that line? That's the first question. Or is it anybody?
Well, I mean, the way so it's been a very interesting process of getting this on the ballot. So, and I know I appreciate that we can have some time to dig into it. So that means we can talk to the audience in an educated way, which is cool. So when you put a initiative on the ballot in Florida through the citizens, right? This is not through the elected officials and these other ways in which they can take a variety of different issues. You have to adhere to what's called the single source rule. They can only do one thing at a time. And you have to be really tight in terms of the language that you use to define what it is that you're trying to do, or the court can throw it out, right? So that's why it had to be very descriptive in terms of the felonies that were involved. So murder, violent sexual felonies, right? So that's where it's one of those issues where I think there's some conversations, and honestly, like healthy conversation about where those lines should be. But those lines came out of the conversations, years of conversations with the public that basically said, okay, hey, where are we? We have to have a simple line. We're not in a situation in which we can, we're not in a school environment or a political science discussion. It's like this has to go before the Supreme Court, and they have to rule that it's like, okay, that's tight. That can go on the ballot. And so those are the lines that we drew. And the context of it is important, I think, too, in the fact that the system is so broken.
Yeah,
that's came about because of the public. So, millions of people, families, who came together and said, oh, my gosh, we can't do this anymore. We've been promised for decades that somebody was going to help solve this. Let's do it ourselves. Yeah. And so that's kind of the context in terms of how we got to where we are.
All right. The second question that I wanted to run by you is was initiated by a conversation that I had with Jessica. Now, if you don't mind, once I get this out, share with everyone who Jessica is and her relationship to the organization. But,
okay.
In my conversation with Jessica, if I'm not mistaken, she's gone out and gotten a law degree, but she's not really able to practice because she's got this felony hanging over her head. Now, in addition to that, she can't even do things like, she was telling me she can't coach on one of her child's sports teams. She can't be in the homeowners association. She can't do this. And the point of this question is, dive into some of the things that you can't do that I take for granted because I haven't been convicted of a felony, that some of our beloved listeners are going to go, wow, man, that in addition to the punishment that had been inflicted on you for the crime that was committed. That, in addition to it, is pretty damn heavy.
Well, yeah, and you bring up a good point. One, Jessica's an amazing person. She's a great leader, and just compassionate as can be. Awesome mom. And as she would say, she got her felony conviction before she had even thought about having kids, and now has kids. And what really can get me worked up is listening to the impact that what we call the collateral consequences of having a felony conviction have on our kids. There's a lot of school activities that she can't get involved in. There's a lot of, like you said, after-school activities in terms of sports programs that she can't take part in, or even within certain homeowners associations. There could be after events and even making decisions within homeowners associations. Some homeowners associations have policies that you can't even live there. And there's like with public housing in a lot of areas, you can't access housing because of a past felony conviction. For me, one of the things that I really enjoy.
Hold on one second. One thing that I want to touch on something that she said, and that is like assisted care homes, retirement homes. If you've got a felony,
right.
there are some of them that won't even let elderly people stay there. Am I correct?
That's correct. And
it's
even
appalling.
some visitation.
Yeah, it is ridiculous.
The example I use because then you have about 70% of the licenses, state licenses, have some sort of felony-related item in there, right? So people can't become barbers. One of my dearest friends has been clean for 16 years. He got arrested with mushrooms in 1998, and he is a champion of the recovery community, but he can't get a license to be a drug and alcohol counselor. And I'm like, that guy should be a drug and alcohol counselor. Nobody knows it better.
Yeah, you're speaking from experience. What about this woman that Kim Kardashian got out of jail? She by going to the White House, and Donald Trump had her released. I mean, it was her first marijuana conviction, I believe it was, and she got a life sentence. Meanwhile, now, as she walks out of prison, however many years later, I think it was like 15 or 16 years later, it's legal in so many states. I can't imagine what's going through her mind.
Yeah, and it's for me, the example that I bring up is what's going on with like Uber and Lyft and the cab industry right now, right? I literally had a friend of mine call me last week. He actually works for the Christian Coalition, and he said he was in a cab, and he started talking to this cab driver. And again, hey man, I want everybody to have a business, and I want you to succeed. But if you bought like 20 cabs 10 years ago, and suddenly Uber and Lyft are everywhere, I get it that you want to do whatever you can to protect your market, right? So this guy starts talking to my friend, and he says, "Oh yeah, you don't use Uber or Lyft." And he's like, "Well, why not?" He's like, "Because they let felons drive their cars." Right? Yeah. And so we start this whole conversation like, this is how it happens. Mm-hmm. And if you're not allowed to actually participate in the community, you're not able to kind of step up and say, whoa. Like, hey, man, I want you to have a job. But don't use us to try and create some sort of new rule to block the market. You know what I'm saying? It's like it offends me on a bunch of different levels as a capitalist and as somebody who's returning to the thing. But I think that's how these things work.
Yeah.
And it's a left, right, center issue where people just kind of like, oh, you know what? This is a felon thing. Or we had one instance in which we're going to, now write a whole new policy, and there's really no one to kind of stop and say, can we talk about that for a second?
Neil, I have some stats here that I had when the mainstream media, which I used to be a part of, and I just find them to be a joke now, I hate to say it, when they were so up in arms about all the illegals that were coming across and their kids were being separated from the parents and this and that, and they're focusing on how horrible it was for these kids who came here illegally. Meanwhile, in America, 2.7 million kids have a parent in prison. 400,000 kids are in foster care, many because their parents are in prison. And nobody talks about that. And the fact that once those people get out, yourself included, you have that stigma you have to put up with. And again, we are talking, this excludes felony, rape, and murder and really violent crimes. But otherwise, if you've served your time, and I believe there is a waiting period, right? I think Jessica told me when I spoke there a couple days ago, there's like a 5 to 7 year waiting period as well.
Yeah, so there's two
and then you can
pieces
vote.
of that. One, yeah, well, yeah, and the process is the bureaucracy. Right? The real problem is, and I'm sure folks on your show get it. It's like there is this in theory, a process that you can wait 5 to 7 years, and then you can get a 1-minute conversation with whoever happens to be governor at that time. But the way it works in reality is that there's also an administrative waiting period of between 10 and 15 years. So I know folks who have been waiting over 20 years because they wrote a bad check 25 years ago. And so it's the bureaucracy. It's just a system that doesn't work. But to your point, and man, I got to tell you, like when you were talking about it, it reminded me, I went to Trump rallies in Miami and Naples, in Fort Myers, and I was getting petitions signed. And those are the kind of conversations that people would talk to me about, right? And it was this idea of being a citizen, of being a full citizen. And why in the world is my neighbor, or why in the world is my brother or my sister or my aunt or uncle in a situation in which all of a sudden their citizenship has been taken from them? And yet it seems, that there's it isn't consistent with the way some other things get treated sometimes.
No, I agree.
And so that was definitely something that we were all, you've been to the rallies, you're there and you're just like, wow, so many people, so having an amazing conversation. And I would hear that over and over and over again.
Well, and one of the things that I have never, and again, Neil, you got to understand, I don't have a felony record, so there are things that I take for granted, privileges that I have that quite frankly, I do take for granted. And one of those is filling out any kind of a loan application or a resident application or a mortgage application, car note, school documents that I used to fill out for my kids. And, ladies and gentlemen, most of us look right past that box that says, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And we either check no or,
you don't think twice about it. At least I never thought twice about it.
Checking that box, if you're honest enough to check that box, it can really move you right onto the sidelines where you can't participate in the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got to tell you, I saw that, right? So one of the things for me was, like, I acknowledged that when I got in trouble, I didn't really like who I was, right? So I was more comfortable, shading the truth here and lying over here. And so when I really wanted to try and change myself, I checked the box, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to live with the consequences of this. And I'll never forget that one moment of going in, having what I thought was just this great interview with this lady. She had a company and she just signed a bunch of new clients and she needed help. Service those clients. And she's like, Neil, this is great. Nice to meet you. Oh, Neil, you're the best. And I remember her saying, well, Neil, when can you start? I'm like, this is going great. She just asked me when I could start. And then she saw the check mark. And I always tell the story now because it's become funny, but it was weird at the moment. Then she just looked at me. She's like, oh, Nick, I don't know what we're going to do. And I'm like, you just called me the wrong name. I'm pretty sure I know how this one's going down. And I actually felt bad for her in that moment. Because I was like, okay, I don't know what her situation is, but I think she's feeling like, hey, she can't hire me.
Yeah.
And she just met somebody who she wanted to. So it was like a lose-lose, like both of us. Like,
well,
I didn't think, So.
There are a lot of great people, yourself and Jessica, who now I know that do have that felony in their background, and they deserve to be fellow citizens, especially when it comes to voting for important things. We got less than a minute left, Neil. I want to throw something at you, and that is Ron DeSantis. Is he on board with this yet or not?
He is ultimately, we've heard a variety of different things. And that's, not here nor there, because honestly, what we're trying to do is we're just really trying to talk to the folks. And so we know that different elected officials pop and say certain things and then, say with something different at some point. And we're trying to just kind of stay away from that if we could, to just focus on what we've been doing for years, long before we knew who would be running for governor or secretary of anything,
Well,
so,
here's the bottom line. You can stay away from it. I'm encouraging our listeners to get on the phone and get DeSantis on board with this. He needs to do it, and he needs to do it because, A, it's the right thing to do, and B, he needs to win Florida. So, Donna, Neil, we got to cut it short here, buddy. Donna, who do we have coming up
Well, let
next?
me just tell everybody, go to the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. It's FloridaRRC.org. FloridaRRC.org. It's Amendment 4 on the ballot initiative in Florida. Again, it is only for people who have served their time, giving them the right to vote and to get their lives back in order. Neil, thank you so much for joining us here on Cowboy Logic Radio.
You guys are great. Thank you so much.
And we'll be talking to Claire Lopez coming up next, Middle East expert. It's all coming up next on Cowboy Logic Radio.
It's all around me. It's all around me. It's all around me. Yeah.
Check us out on the web at cowboylogic.us.
Hello, everyone. I'm Donna Fiducia.
And I'm Don Neuen, and this is Cowboy Logic Radio.
Cowboys didn't dance, didn't wear designer shirts. When their hearts were filled with memories, their bodies filled with hurt. They would sit around the campfire and exchange a piercing glares. Back when the West was really wild, cowboys didn't dance.
Welcome back to Cowboy Logic Radio. I'm Donna Fiducia, along with Don Neuen, and he's going to behave himself now because we have Claire Lopez coming up. And Claire, you are like Don's idol.
You are, Claire.
He's so looked
That's
forward.
a bit much to live up to, honestly.
It really isn't, but I got to tell you, Claire, if I could be anybody for a day, it would be you.
I just want to know. I want to know what is in Claire's brain. That's what I want to know because there's
way too much.
Yeah, that's really. It is scary.
There's some
falling
Farsi
out.
in there.
Yep, there's Farsi in there too because we were going to interview you yesterday and you couldn't because you had a Farsi lesson. So anyhow, on top of everything else, but let me introduce you formally because we did have the pleasure of meeting you at the South Carolina Tea Party Coalition Convention last January. It was just
right.
awesome.
That was fun.
It was. But you are the Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy, which is Frank Gaffney's baby, Secure Freedom Radio, heard on our network. Claire is also a policy and intelligence expert with a focus on national defense, Islam, Iran, and counterterrorism issues. She's a former career operations officer with the CIA. She was named to the Congressional Task Force on National and Homeland Security in 2012, which focuses on the electromagnetic pulse and its threat to America. She serves as a member of the Board of Advisors and Directors for the Center for Democracy and Human Rights in Saudi Arabia, the United West, and the Voice of the Cops. That's COPTS. And if you've seen or heard her on radio and television, you probably read her stuff as well. She's the author of The Rise of the Iran Lobby and co-author of the Center for Security Policy's study, Sharia, the Threat to America, and the Secure Freedom Strategy, a plan for victory on the global jihad movement. If that's not enough, again, she takes Farsi lessons, and she completed Marine Corps Officer Candidate School in Quantico, Virginia.
I think that was an elective that she took.
I mean, it takes the entire interview to do your
Claire, let me ask
resume.
you this. Seriously. And we've introed you countless times, so we always talk about the Marine Candidacy School. What was your decision to not become a Marine and become a CIA gal?
Well, I had submitted my application to the agency while I was still in grad school. But the process takes a long time, and by the time I'd finished my master's and my thesis and everything else, and I was done, this is Maxwell School, Syracuse University, where I studied international relations. I did not have an offer letter in my hand. The process was not finished, and so off I went to Quantico, Virginia, in the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School. But while I was there, the letter came that I was really waiting for, and that had always been my first choice. So I completed the training. I went to the night before graduation, went in, told the captain, I am not going to be graduating tomorrow. I've got this other offer, and off I went.
Wow.
So the Marine Corps' loss was the CIA's gain.
Exactly. And you went to
Or something like
Syracuse.
that.
I went to Seton Hall, so we're rivals there. That's for sure.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
but I want to start. First of all, when I spoke with you yesterday, I mentioned this guy, Khashoggi, who was killed now they're saying he definitely was
Are you
killed.
saying that properly?
No, well, that's the whole point. And Claire, being the Middle East expert that she is, corrected me, it's Khashoggi, correct?
Khashoggi.
Okay.
And from what I understand, the G part at the end of the name is something between an honorific and a diminutive.
Okay. I'll take
In
your word for that.
That part of the world.
Oh, okay.
Or
Whatever
perhaps
that
even
means.
from further east.
Okay. All right, but here's my question. Let's get down to the seriousness, though. With what is going on in Turkey, with what happened at the Saudi embassy, give your take on this whole mess, because it is. See, as a person who grew up in America and really hasn't traveled as much as I would like, I've been to Europe a couple of times, but the thing is, most people in this country take for granted basic human rights. That is not the case in Saudi Arabia. How do we combat that culture?
Well, I mean, the entire Muslim world and the entire membership of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, which is all the Muslim governments in the world, 57 of them, literally abrogated. They pulled out of the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights way back in 1990 and published something else in its stead that they agreed to, which is called the Cairo Declaration. And in that, Articles 24 and 25, the last two of the document, it basically says the human rights that they agree to, the entire Muslim world, all the countries in the world that are Muslim, the only human rights they agree to are those granted under Sharia, Islamic law. So to even consider that Muslims adhere to or respect the same set of human rights that others that we of Western civilization do is absurd. Of course not. Of course they don't.
You know, we're here in Georgia, and Stacey Abrams is running for governor, and she's been actually campaigning with Linda Sarsour. And it's amazing to me how naive people are. I mean, I just want to get on top of a mountain and scream, how stupid can you be here? How can the left be aligning themselves while they say, you know, we're the party for women's rights and hashtag Me Too and all this stuff?
Well, you see, what's going on at the moment is something that's opportunistic. It's ad hoc. It's opportunistic. And it is what we sometimes refer to as the red-green axis. So the red part of that is the hard left, communist, Marxist element here in the United States, well, elsewhere too. And the green part of that is Islam. And for the moment in the United States and elsewhere too, especially Western Europe, it is opportune that the two combine forces for what purpose? They share the objective of tearing down Western civilization, of tearing down the United States Constitution. They both figure that, you know, when that's all done, each one thinks that they're going to come out on top, or, you know, they'll settle that part later. But for right now, their objectives coincide. Tear down Western civilization in the United States of America.
We're talking with Claire Lopez. She's Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy. She is a Middle East expert. And Claire, let's get back to Khashoggi.
Yeah, wait a minute. Before you come up with this question, Claire, lay out the groundwork and the backstory of this guy.
Okay,
you know, I know a little bit about him, but and we've talked about it on Cowboy Logic. We've talked about it in the sit rep that I do with Denise Simon. But let's get the experts' analysis and background of this guy that was killed.
Okay, so he was a 61 or 62, I forget, year old Saudi citizen Jamal Khashoggi, and simultaneously he also held United States legal permanent resident status, which made him a U.S. person under the definition of U.S. law. He had worked as a journalist for some time, and back in the 80s, actually interviewed, quite sympathetically, it might be noted, Osama bin Laden, was sympathetic to Al-Qaeda, and more recently had drawn close to the Muslim Brotherhood jihadist regime of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, the AK Party, or Justice and Development Party. So he was a true believer. He was a devout and practicing Muslim from way back and until the present. And he apparently had divorced his first wife and wanted now to marry his Turkish fiancée. And it was for that reason that he had to go to the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey, to obtain paperwork that would allow that second marriage to go through. And so in he went, never to emerge again.
So
that is 2 weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, October the 2nd.
He was critical. He was critical of the Saudi prince. Now, this Saudi prince, everybody's thinking, oh, this is really cool. He's letting women drive for a change. You know, they're not killing as many people as, I mean, they kill lesbians and gays. They kill, women who get raped because they are, I guess, basically a black spot on their family if that happens. Women can't go out. I mean, life in Saudi Arabia is hellish for a woman, quite frankly. But this guy was critical of the prince, even though the prince was starting to loosen some of the constraints in that country. And I mean, I just don't see how this could happen to him without the prince's okay.
Agreed on that point. Totally agreed. What might be helpful is to go to the Washington Post, for which Jamal Khashoggi wrote many columns, and the Post published, it must be a week ago now or so, a summary of some of Khashoggi's columns. And not the complete columns, I think, but summaries of a bunch of them. And if you read them, what you'll see is that he was very directly and by name criticizing, condemning, calling out the Saudi crown prince, that is Mohammed bin Salman, known popularly as MBS, and other Saudi royals. But here's the point that I made in an article I wrote for the Daily Caller, which was published this past week on the 17th of October, and that is that Khashoggi, he accused MBS by name of certain specific crimes, including corruption and extremism. Now, those words have a meaning that we all think is common here in the English language in the West. But under the law of Islam, under Sharia, to be accused of corruption is to be accused of a crime specifically named in the Quran in verse 532 and 533. And of course, as Muslims believe, the Quran is the word of Allah. Now, if Allah himself, in fact, those two verses I should caveat were lifted, or the first of those, 531, lifted directly out of the Jewish scripture, the Mishnah, which is the commentary on the Talmud. But never mind, it's in the Quran, and that crime is very specifically named in the Quran as something that brings the direst penalty, amputation of the hand and foot on opposite sides, crucifixion, or exile from the land. He also accused MBS of extremism. Now, we think we know what extremism is, but in Islam it has a specific meaning, and here again, reference the Quran, verse 2, 191, where, again, as Muslims believe, it is the voice of Allah speaking through the words of the Quran, saying, fight and kill the infidels, but do not exceed the limits. In other words, don't go too far, too fast, The accusation, by the way, that was leveled at Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda for the attacks of 9/11, because they went too far too fast, they exceeded the limits and brought down the wrath of a very still powerful U.S. military on Muslim lands, Muslim people who were not prepared for the onslaught. That is exceeding the limits within the vocabulary of Islam. This is what Khashoggi specifically accused MBS of. Now, it's not just MBS or the royals, the Saudi royal family, but because they are the keepers of what Muslims call the two holy places, Mecca and Medina, Mecca being the place of pilgrimage every Muslim is supposed to go once in a lifetime if it's possible, that accusation is not just against those individuals, but against Islam itself. And the Saudi royal family has no legitimacy within the Islamic world to rule except as defenders and keepers of those two holy places and defenders of Islam. And so by accusing those figures of these specific crimes, in my opinion, this is part, maybe not the whole reason. There's lots of other stuff going on. Palace intrigue, intelligence, machinations behind the scenes. But these accusations could not be allowed to stand without a very serious and, in a way, public response and punishment, which was, unfortunately for Khashoggi, the death penalty.
How does our lack of understanding this culture play into what Donald Trump's going to have to do? Because we just don't understand the culture.
No, people don't. But I think our president has some very good instincts. And the bottom line for me, and I think maybe for the president too, is that Khashoggi, for being a Saudi citizen, which he was also simultaneously a U.S. person. He had legal status under U.S. law. And that has to be defended, that status, not the man per se, as Muslim Brotherhood jihadi, but the status of U.S. person needs to be defended if it's to mean anything at all, if it's not to be open season on Americans, which might some people say it already is. But the president has said that once if the evidence bears out that the Saudis were guilty of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, that there would be, in Trump's words, quote, severe punishment. And that's what has to happen. There must be a public acknowledgement, not there was a fist fight inside the consulate and he unfortunately got killed in the process. Right. No, that's absurd. But an acknowledgement that they killed him, an apology to the United States, and then the penalty must be applied, whatever Trump decides. And then I think it's important that we preserve the relationship. It's an important relationship for the region's stability, for U.S. security objectives, Israel's, and to counter, especially to counter Iran's geostrategic aggression in the region.
Right.
Yeah, we need it.
Khashoggi, in your opinion, was this guy a bad hombre?
He was a Muslim Brotherhood supporting a devout Muslim.
If he was friends with Osama bin Laden...
Hold on. Now, I have also heard that his uncle or a relative of his was one of, if not one of the biggest gun runners in the Middle East. Is that accurate?
Well, there's a lot of stuff flying around, and I don't have all the specific, verification of everything. Put it that way.
Okay, so that's unvetted. We don't know whether...
Unvetted to me. Other people may have better information.
Okay. All right. Second thing I wanted to ask you. Give me the definition or the description between a U.S. citizen and a person of the United States.
Okay, so U.S. person is the term here, and it applies to both a U.S. citizen and a person who's been granted permanent legal resident status. So a citizen is a U.S. person, and a legal permanent resident is a U.S. person under the legal definition of U.S. law. Okay.
And is a U.S. person granted all of the protection that a U.S. citizen is granted?
Well, the obligations and the protections are somewhat different. But certainly the status of being a U.S. person has to mean something, and when an American is murdered on foreign soil by foreign hostile forces, there have to be consequences.
I agree. Claire, in this segment, we've got about 4 more minutes. I want to ask you about this onslaught of Central American refugees, and I use the term lightly, that is encroaching on our borders.
Illegal alien border crashers.
There you go. Thank you, Claire.
She's so politically incorrect.
I love it. At any rate, I heard last week that there were a number of Islamists that were either detained or arrested. Now, again, I can't cite my source. I don't know whether I heard somebody tell me this or whether I read it. But,
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It has been in the media, the news.
Okay. What's up with that?
Among this horde, which is variously numbered at, a few to several thousand, that something like 100 Islamic State terrorists were somehow ferreted out from among them and arrested. I have no idea how they identified these people, how they arrested these people, how they knew they were Islamic State and not, I don't know, Al-Qaeda.
Maybe they spoke Arabic,
Hezbollah.
And they didn't speak Spanish. Because the thing is, if you really
Hezbollah
look at
speaks
them,
Arabic too.
well, yeah, they could, but they could look like Mexicans, so they can sort of blend in. And the thing is, obviously, you've got probably the George Soroses of the world, bankrolling this whole thing. That always seems to happen right before Election Day. But I mean, there's women and children, yes, but the majority of are men of fighting age, and that's scary.
Well, it's also not credible, that they are claiming that the situation back home is so dire, so terrible, that these young, healthy men just up and left all the women and children to their fates and fled for their lives for the U.S. border. That is absurd.
Well, the still photos that they show, that we see in the media and that we see online, clearly, I mean, the men are outnumbering the women and children by a massive amount.
Oh, absolutely. And it was the same thing, remember, with the illegal Hijra Muslim men pouring into Europe over these last couple of years, especially in 2015.
Yeah.
And you can see it.
All men.
Well, and the thing is, you take a look at these photos, and quite frankly, I don't know whether it's people that are trying to get to Italy or Germany from the Middle East, or if they're coming up from Central America. You can't tell these people apart.
But you know what, Claire? There's one picture that sticks in my mind with the European group that was going in there back in 2015. And so was a woman carrying a baby and just weighted down with all kinds of stuff. And she was barefoot, and her quote unquote husband was just walking in front of her carrying nothing. And so,
that's a good snapshot of the situation. Women simply are not valued equally within the Arab Muslim civilization or under Islamic law. They're just not valued equally under the law.
We got about a minute before we got to go to break. As a woman, and I'll throw this to both of you all, why is it that the liberal women's organizations are not speaking out about this? Why is it just the conservative men and women that seem to be speaking out about the way Islamic women are treated?
You're right. It seems to me, and I'll let Don answer too, that there is a hierarchy of valued people. And at the top of that list right now are Muslims. Women, even if they are Muslims, fall somewhere further down the list. They're just not up at the top.
No, they're not. And quite frankly, it's Marxism. All it is control. They want the control. And I guess they'll divvy up the pieces later on when the whole world falls apart. But Claire Lopez, we're going to take a break. Be back with more. And Claire, I want to ask you a little more about this guy, Jamal Khashoggi. I'm so used to saying Khashoggi, I got to think about it. Khashoggi, when we come back after the break.
Check us out on the web at cowboylogic.us.
Back to Cowboy Logic Radio. I'm Donna Fiducia, along with Don NEUEN, and we're continuing our conversation with Claire Lopez because it takes half the show just to do her resume. But she is, for the most part, the Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy. And she has written for the Daily Caller recently on 10/17, so October 17th. Go back to the Daily Caller, look up her stuff. And also she wrote for the Citizens Commission on National Security, and that's at ccnationalsecurity.org. That's ccnationalsecurity.org, and that stands for Citizens Commission. And what exactly did you write about for them, Claire?
So I wrote an analysis of the new national strategy for counterterrorism that just came out from the White House a couple of weeks ago, and that is the new Trump administration policy for, well, counterterrorism. I'll have to say that while I give the president and his team points, this is a good initiative, as the first such document like this issued since 2011, and we like very much the president's America First focus, his emphasis on secure borders, his discussion of local law enforcement as the key, having a key role to play in counterterrorism. But then I mention a few things else, too. And one is that I think we should just change the language that we speak of these things with in any case. And that is, we're not fighting terrorism. We should stop talking about fighting terrorism. We're not fighting terrorism. We fight to defend our Constitution and to live free of Islamic law. And I suppose that's not politically correct to say so either, but that's what we're fighting for, the Constitution. We're not fighting terrorism. In fact, in my opinion, and others too, I should say, the most lethal threat to our republic, to our Constitution, is not violence, is not terrorism at all. It's subversion of the civilization jihad kind that the Muslim Brotherhood practices and others within what they call the overall Islamic movement. That is the most deadly because it's subterfuge. It's behind the scenes. It's smooth talking, clean shaven, nicely suited. We call them jihadis in suits, who unfortunately all too easily sometimes fool the gullible, who want to believe that there is such a thing as a moderate Islam. Of course, there's not. There's only Islam. But they want desperately to believe that this could be so, and that is the subversion then that I think is way more dangerous than terrorism. So that's one of the points I make in this analysis. Also, I have found that a lot of the language in this new paper echoes previous language of the Obama administration and the countering violent extremism or CVE narrative kind of language that the Muslim Brotherhood, in fact, gave the administration of Obama. So I think that needs a little bit of updating. And then there is a lack of holding Iran and its proxy Hezbollah to account. There is mention of Iran, and that's a good thing, as the number one state sponsor of terrorism in the world. That is certainly in there and good. But there's no mention of Hezbollah. It's number one largest proxy, which operates all over the Western Hemisphere, including right here inside the United States, with all kinds of narco-trafficking, money laundering, and other kinds of criminality. Not even mentioned in the paper. So those are the things that I note in my own analysis. And then, of course, the penetration by the operatives of the global Islamic movement into every sector of American society, from academia to banking, finance, courts, legal system, faith communities, government at every level, local law enforcement, media, national security, politics, society, workplace in general, just to name a few.
Well, I was going to ask you, Claire Lopez, if you would mind enlightening the listeners on how entrenched these jihadis in suits actually are. And I think you just did that in the last sentence.
Incredibly well entrenched.
I mean, at all aspects.
They have kids.
How far into our intelligence community and in our military are they?
Completely and totally. I was at a conference that shall remain nameless for the sake of the guilty within this past week, at which a number of senior-ranking military officials spoke, and not a single one of them had a bloody clue what the Islamic movement was, the Muslim Brotherhood, the domestic insurgency, which is how we term what's going on, perpetrated by those operatives. No clue, none whatsoever that this was even happening.
But they're starting at a young age. There's kids in grammar school reciting, the pillars of Islam. And how is that allowed when you can't talk about Catholicism or Judaism in a Judeo-Christian country? I mean, it's
we
insane.
have private schools in this country that are privately funded. I mean, there are Catholic schools and Lutheran schools and Baptist schools, and there are Islamic madrasas, schools, often attached to an Islamic center, a mosque, and loads and loads of American Muslim kids attend either on a part-time weekend basis or sometimes full-time too.
Now, I'm talking about public schools, grammar schools, and people are finding out that their kids are being taught about Islam. And it's very scary because they're starting at a young age. And, we know the communist base, who was it? Stalin said, give me a kid up to age 8 and I got the kid. That's it.
Claire,
here's another. I was just going to, real quick, say another place that the Muslim Brotherhood and their allies of the global Islamic movement have penetrated is into the textbook companies.
Yep.
There are boards of advisors. I mean, as you would expect for a biology textbook. Did I get photosynthesis right? Okay, we need a scientist to make sure on the board. Well, they've got for civics and history books, textbooks at the big companies. They've got Muslim brothers and affiliates and associates of them on their boards to review the textbooks. That's why we got what we got. The obligation, the responsibility must fall to the families, the citizens, to look at the books your kids are bringing home. Read what's in them. And if you're not in agreement, if you think what's in there is wrong, you've got to speak up, take it to the school, the school board, or whatever level is necessary.
Well, I got to tell you on a sidebar note that my oldest son, I enrolled him down in the county that Donna and I live in for his high school years. Got him out of public schools and put him in a very small Christian Baptist private school. And I one summer read his world history book. And it was so refreshing, Claire. It was so refreshing to read a history book like I had 45 years ago.
Here's what scares me is that Obama was in there for 8 years and the backslide happened so fast. All of a sudden you got Common Core, you got all this stuff, and there's no once it's in there, it's so hard to turn it back, and that's what really scares me. But we're getting off course.
All right, let me get us back on course. I know, but hold on, Claire. We talked about all these areas where Sharia law is starting to creep into, and the suit-wearing jihadists are infiltrating. One of the big concerns that I've got is in the judicial system as well. Now, let me ask you this. How is it possible for a judge, and I believe she is in the New York area, that a Muslim judge can actually adhere to the Constitution first, as opposed to Sharia law? How is that possible?
Well, every Muslim, as we know, has the obligation to obey Islamic law above all other law. That is the obligation. Now, whether they actually do it or not might be another question. But how is it possible to be sincerely faithful to Islamic law as a Muslim and to be sincerely faithful to the Constitution when the two, Sharia and the Constitution, are at odds on so many different points? It's not possible.
That was kind of the point of my question.
So you have Taqiyya.
So she's either a complete apostate, and she is following the rule of law and putting the Constitution above all else, or she's practicing Taqiyya, and she is aligning herself with Sharia law in her judgments that are supposed to be constitutional.
So in other words, it's okay if you're studying Islamic law, strict Islamic law. Taqiyya says basically you can lie to us infidels, which I've said on many times is ISIS is the JV team. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. I mean, to me, that's Taqiyya, but that's just another story. I want to get to Keith Ellison, who is a Muslim. He's an admitted Muslim. To me, what he did is allowed under Islamic law, and he basically assaulted his girlfriend, and his ex-wife is even claiming that he roughed her up.
Well, it seems that these allegations are costing him in the election. You know, your listeners probably know that Keith Ellison has been a member of the House of Representatives in Congress, but he is giving up that seat this election cycle, and in a couple of weeks, November, running for Attorney General of the state of Minnesota. But that race has become pretty tight, pretty close, as those allegations, I think, have taken some toll on his numbers.
He ran the DNC, too.
Well, I wonder if anybody's asked Keith Ellison, because if he wants to become the Attorney General for the state of Minnesota, then he has to follow along not only the U.S. Constitution, but I would assume the Constitution for the state of Minnesota. And how do you do that, Keith? Why is no one asking him that question?
He can lie, but he can lie. That's what
Claire,
gets me.
Why is nobody asking him that question?
The state of Minnesota has a media that is well-trained, well-cowed, and does not want to be accused of being bigots, racists, haters, and Islamophobes.
Well, Minnesota has a heavily Muslim population now, much more so. I do not find that question that I just hypothetically ask of Keith Ellison to be Islamophobic or racist or any of these other liberal terms that have popped up over the past 10 years.
We don't think so. No, of course not.
But they say it is because you're even asking the question. But the Minnesota media would. Exactly. I wonder how many of those people that Mike Lindell employs over at his My Pillow.
If I can put a plug in right now, it is for a series of occasional papers that we are rolling out that are dedicated to describing the situation on the ground in the state of Minnesota and also the state of Michigan. Mm-hmm. And these occasional papers eventually are going to become chapters in a monograph for each state, Minnesota and Michigan. So what we're doing is we're rolling them out one by one at the Center for Security Policy, centerforsecuritypolicy.org. And we have one out in the state of Minnesota written by Trevor Loudon, which you can find at our website, centerforsecuritypolicy.org. And it explains a good deal about what I mentioned before, the red-green axis in that state, and how the foothold of leftist, communist, Marxists in the last century and even before, paved the way for eventual arrival of the green, Islam, and what we now see is a collaboration, as I said before, ad hoc, opportunistic collaboration between them, and that is what is assaulting the state of Minnesota right now, Michigan too.
Yeah, it's just not compatible with the U.S. Constitution. To me, it's a cancer that's growing. I hate to say it, but I know it's politically incorrect, but that's what I feel. Let's talk a little bit about, if you would, also the situation with an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, and the great threat it is to America. You also are very big on that, and I think that is just so scary because it's another thing that we're just asleep at the wheel about.
Well, this is another one of these existential threats that, to his credit, President Trump did include in the national security strategy. That is a paper rolled out a bit earlier this year. It came out last year, 2017. And it was mentioned in that document. Of course, electromagnetic pulse is a phenomenon that can be caused either by the sun sending out these massive solar flares, or it can be created by a nuclear weapon detonated in the high atmosphere that causes no explosion or damage on Earth at the time it goes off. But because our civilian electric grid is completely unprotected, it very well could take down our entire grid, meaning loss of electricity and everything that depends on it in the entire country. We would not be able to survive that kind of a catastrophic event. So, as I said, it was mentioned in the President's National Security Strategy of 2017, but unfortunately, at the federal level, there are still no major steps underway to secure the civilian grid. And let's remember that it is not just us civilians who depend on that civilian electric grid, but it is also the entire U.S. military and its bases here in the United States. The U.S. military and the United States government depend on the civilian grid too. So whether it's the sun, whether it's a hostile nuclear power like Iran or North Korea or China, or whether it's a cyber attack, that's another possibility.
Yeah.
We need some serious steps to protect our grid.
Well, and a big hat tip to you, Claire Lopez, to Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. You know, you two are our primary go-to subject matter experts when we start talking about EMPs. And we've been talking about it with you two for years now. Now, I'm going to regurgitate some of the things that I've learned from the two of you. Maybe you can update me, correct me, validate what I'm saying. First of all, in order to protect our grid, the grid of the United States, and I need to preface this, ladies and gentlemen, with the fact that it's not if, but rather when one of these events occurs, either solar or nuclear or cyber. One of those things, one of those three will occur, and it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when it will take place. Now, in order to protect the United States grid and the citizens of the United States, which our federal government is charged with doing, at a basic level of $2 billion, we could protect at a basic level the United States public grid. At military spec level, I have heard the number of $20 billion. Now, for a federal government that is hemorrhaging money,
$20 trillion in debt,
that is a small price to pay. And it would also be a small price to pay even if it was passed down to the end user, being Donna, Claire, and Don, to minimal amounts on a monthly basis. But why is this not being done when $20 billion is pocket change in Washington?
You're making such good points, Don. Maybe that's the problem. It's just too logical. The United States government has known about the EMP effects of a nuclear explosion since basically World War II. Certainly after tests called Starfish Prime in 1962. No excuse after that. And yet they have failed in this absolutely basic fundamental responsibility to protect the civilian electric grid. Part of the opposition comes from the private power and utilities companies that don't want to be tasked, don't want to be burdened with what would be, quite an upgrade, a set of measures they would need to take. The cost, as you said, though, Don, exactly, would be passed along to the customer, and at a terribly, really reasonable rate per year per electric customer, user. The basic level of protection could be obtained. Higher levels, better levels at higher cost, of course. But just to begin, so what is happening is that people who are serious about this, and Frank Gaffney, the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy, has just been unflagging, just indefatigable on this topic, talking about it around the country. But here's the approach now that he is taking, and that is to go to individual states, because it is more likely and more possible. There's a better reception from certain states. I can name my Wyoming, possibly Texas, possibly some others, that are looking into protection, at least of their state, such that if a catastrophic event took down the grid in the rest of the country, at least that state would not go black, and it wouldn't be a total black start attempt for the entire country.
Well, Texas has its own grid on its own, so that would be ideal. Claire, we only have a few minutes left. There's two things that I want for Christmas, Claire Lopez. I want to have the country EMP proof, and I want Donald Trump to outlaw the Muslim Brotherhood. And you, Claire Lopez, are working on both.
Well, no, not exactly.
The Center for Security Policy might be working.
The Center for Security Policy is, but my own personal opinion on things is that the Muslim Brotherhood operates not through terror at all, and cannot and should not legally be designated to the foreign terrorist organization list. Not to mention that the Muslim Brotherhood has representation in a number of partner countries with which we work in the Middle East, namely, for one, Jordan, among others. And so I don't think it belongs on the FTO list. That's my personal opinion. It's not the center's position. I think that we need to go after them for what they actually do, which is subversion. We've talked about this. Subversion. They don't do terrorism. They simply don't do terrorism. Boko Haram does terrorism. Taliban does. Al-Qaeda does. Islamic State does. Muslim Brotherhood are jihadis in suits. This is civilization jihad. This needs a whole other set of understanding and countermeasures, which we haven't even begun to do because we're chasing like a pack of mad hounds after terrorism. And I think the focus should be brought back to subversion and the infiltration by the jihadis in suits of our key pillars of society in this country.
Excellent point. That's a great way of looking at it, which obviously is why we have you on the show, Claire Lopez. Give us what you think is going to be the situation with this guy, Khashoggi.
Well, as we've mentioned, the Saudi government has now acknowledged that he was killed inside their consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. They're still fudging the details, though. There's no body that we know of having been recovered yet. And the foreign minister spoke today, as I understand. I didn't see it myself because I was too busy, but in a Fox interview, and denied that the Crown Prince had anything to do with this. Now, for anybody who knows anything about how the Saudi royal family regime works, nothing of this level happens without MBS being involved. So that's important, that he acknowledged that he was involved. He had a part in approving that that was a killing. It was a deliberate killing. It was not an accident during a fist fight with a 15-man hit team that flew in on a Saudi government chartered jet. So the full details need to come out. The full acknowledgement of what they've done needs to be made by the Saudis. President Trump, I would urge, I hope that he will follow through with what he said before, that there must be severe punishment. And then my final point is that we need to repair and maintain the bilateral relationship with the Saudis. But we have to get past this first, and it has to do with acknowledgement for the murder of a U.S. person, as well as he was a Muslim brother, associate supporter, and a Saudi citizen.
Well, we have to get past it for sure, because the Saudis will be so helpful against Iran, which now has $150 billion of our money because of what the whole situation was.
If we could only have $20 billion of that money back.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, the corruption and the just horrible situation that we've been put in the last 8 years that Donald Trump has to turn around. But Claire Lopez, as usual, we've run out of time. Find everything at the centerforsecuritypolicy.org, centerforsecuritypolicy.org. And we'll put all this up on the cowboylogic.us website as well. She wrote for the Daily Caller on the 17th of October, so please look that up. And also ccnationalsecurity.org. That's Citizens Commission on National Security, ccnationalsecurity.org. Find all this information, great cutting-edge information from Claire Lopez. And Claire, again, we thank you so much for joining us here on Cowboy Logic Radio.
It's always great to be with you both. Thanks for having me.
And that wraps another Cowboy Logic show up, folks. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us. Find us at cowboylogic.us. And in the meantime, God bless America.
Come on, take my dark sunglasses. 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 Come on, take my dark sunglasses.
Check us out on the web at cowboylogic.us.